Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're talking about an annual ritual in Singapore that affects pretty much every family with a 12-year-old, the Primary School Leaving Examination, or PSLE.
But this is so much more than just a test. It's been called a national obsession. You can literally feel this palpable anxiety descend upon families every single year. It's a rite of passage, for sure, but one that's become a source of incredible stress for an entire country.
So you have to ask, right? How on earth does an academic exam for preteens turn into a major public health challenge for a whole generation? I mean, that's a huge leap. So let's dive in and unpack that.
To really get why the pressure is so intense today, we have to rewind the clock. Because the PSLE wasn't always this high-stakes sorting machine that it's become.
When it first rolled out in 1960, the whole idea was pretty simple. It was just a pass/fail test to get different school systems on the same page. But then 1980 happened, and that was the game changer. The pass/fail system was scrapped, and suddenly the PSLE became this incredibly powerful tool for sorting and streaming kids into different secondary school paths. That one shift completely changed its purpose and, well, its impact.
And this really gets to the heart of the matter. The PSLE stopped being just a checkpoint to see what a kid learned. It became the primary gatekeeper to their entire educational journey and, let's be honest, their future career path too.
Okay, so now let's look under the hood at the mechanics of it all. Let's see how the scoring system itself actually fuels this anxiety even after big reforms were put in place to try and cool things down.
So check this out. The old T-score system was basically a zero-sum game. You were ranked against every other student in the country, which meant for you to move up, someone else had to move down. Talk about intense. The new ATL system that came in 2021 was meant to fix that. The idea was to grade students against a set standard, not against each other.
But here's the thing. The pressure didn't just vanish. As one source put it, the anxiety didn't disappear, it just learned new rules. So instead of chasing every last T-score point, the new obsession became all about crossing the threshold into a better grade band. You know, that frantic push to turn an 89 into a 90, and figuring out a whole new system of tiebreakers. The anxiety just found a new place to live.
So if even major reforms can't get rid of the pressure, what exactly is keeping this engine of anxiety running so hot? What's really going on here?
Well, some research points to this really fascinating and kind of worrying concept. The idea is that parents who themselves survived this exact same stressful system often pass down that anxiety and those intense coping skills, like nonstop studying, to their own kids, almost like it's a necessary rite of passage.
And you know, wherever you find this kind of deep-seated anxiety, you almost always find a huge industry. In 2023, the private tuition market in Singapore was valued at a jaw-dropping $1.4 billion. Over 70% of students are getting some form of extra tutoring.
This whole industry is sometimes called shadow education, and it pretty much runs on the fear of falling behind. What's wild is that it often works directly against what the government is trying to do. For example, when officials got rid of mid-year exams to ease the pressure, tuition centers immediately started offering their own mock exams, which just reinforces the very testing culture the reforms were trying to change.
And all of this brings us to the real, human cost, and the evidence that suggests this is tipped over into a genuine public health crisis.
I mean, just look at the data from the OECD. It's stark. 86% of students in Singapore report worrying about getting poor grades. That is dramatically higher than the international average of 66%. And get this, 76% feel anxious for a test even when they're well prepared. That tells you something is really off. This academic anxiety isn't just an abstract feeling. It has real, devastating consequences. Experts consistently point to it as a major factor in a youth mental health crisis, where suicide has become the leading cause of death for young people. And you can see the stress physically too, with kids reporting everything from insomnia and headaches to pulling away from their friends.
So, what do public health experts call this? They frame it as a form of early life stress, or ELS. And that's a really serious thing. We're talking about chronic, high-level pressure during a critical window for a child's brain development. That kind of stress can actually disrupt how the brain grows, and it's been linked to a higher risk for both psychiatric and medical problems down the road.
And this brings us to a really powerful point. When the negative impact is this widespread, this systemic, the problem is no longer just about individual circumstances. The argument is that the risk factor is participation in the national education system itself. It's become a social determinant of health, a massive stressor impacting an entire population.
So, what's the path forward? Where do you go from here? Well, the debate in Singapore really boils down to two very different philosophies for the future.
On one side, you've got the government's approach of gradual reform, sort of loosening up the system by changing scoring and removing some exams, but keeping the PSLE itself. Then, on the other side, you have critics who are calling for systemic change. They want to change the game entirely by abolishing the PSLE and moving to things like holistic portfolios or creating 10-year through-train schools.
And when you look around the world, you can see these two philosophies in action. You have systems like South Korea and Japan, which share a very similar high-stakes exam culture and, not surprisingly, very similar struggles with student stress. But then you have a top-performing nation like Finland, which has no high-stakes standardized tests until age 16. It proves there are other successful ways to do this.
Ultimately, dismantling this pressure cooker isn't about lowering academic standards. It's about asking a much bigger question. It's about evolving the very definition of success to include not just test scores, but also the resilience, the creativity, and the mental well-being of an entire generation. And that leaves us with a final, crucial question to think about. How should a nation truly define success for its children?